Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar Weekly Discussion topic video, and this one is going to be all about Aang and his family and the relationships within the family. I did get a suggestion to do this one, and initially I thought like I'm perhaps required to do a little bit of research, like rewatch some episodes to fully know what I'm talking about here, but then when I actually thought about it, I think I do know my kind of full thoughts and can do a discussion video on this topic. So yeah, let's get into that straight away. So I think straight away there's a tendency in the fandom to kind of over exaggerate some points about the family relationship here, like really kind of heavily say that Aang wasn't a very good father and that sort of thing. In my opinion, it's more of that they're trying to make it clear that these characters, when they grew up, they weren't perfect parents, but no one ever is. Like, there's a little issue here or there with almost all of our old characters and their families. So primarily, obviously, we only know the Kataang family and then Toph and her daughters. But just that showing that it's not always perfect, but for the most part, it is quite good. And again, compared to like Aang and Katara's family to Toph's family, it's not even that bad, the Kataang family. But let's get into some of the specifics here. I suppose let's actually start off with the idea of this family, in that it's important to note that this is basically the Avatar world's most celebrity kind of couple slash family once that actually starts, because one is the Avatar, who's obviously one of the most notable people in the entire world. And then Katara is obviously fairly famous by virtue of kind of being one of the people as part of Team Avatar who helped bring balance to the world. Perhaps, when the story became known that, she was the one who kind of initially found Aang, it becomes even more of a kind of celebrity couple, as that just from the idea that they're just a kind of ideal couple in that she found him and then they got together and had a family. Like, there's a certain kind of perfection just in those two as a couple that like could definitely become even more celebrity than most people. And add to that the fact that obviously over time they then helped to found like Yu Dao and then the United Republic, and they came to live there and stuff like that. And you have just this family that is just, as I said, the most famous family in like the entire Avatar world at that point. You have Aang, the Avatar, the last airbender. You have Katara, who eventually becomes the most powerful waterbender in the world, like the master waterbender. And then their kids, of course, get some sort of celebrity as well, just by virtue of how famous the couple is. So you can straight away see that obviously Aang and Katara, really great couple. We all know that's a really kind of healthy relationship between the two of them. But definitely the kids, it's an interesting topic because obviously with a lot of celebrity kids, there's perhaps not a lot of time there. There's always the sense of like the kids, if they don't become like as famous, as notable as the parents, that they perhaps see themselves as somewhat of a failure. And you sort of see that with Kaya and Bumi, as we see in kind of book 2, that they sort of felt that way, that they were the forgotten two of Aang and Katara's kids, even though Bumi obviously is the oldest, Kaya middle, and then Tenzin ends up being the most famous of their kids just because he was the last one, just because he was an airbender. And this is probably the most important topic in this entire video. Tenzin being born makes Aang not the last airbender anymore. And it's very easy to think of Aang as like a bad father, looking at it purely from the kid's perspective. But if you look at it from his perspective, and the fact that he's in a pretty high kind of pressure role, having to be the Avatar, bring peace to the world, obviously go places around the world and solve these disputes and stuff like that, plus also have time for his family. And then especially once Tenzin is born, having to effectively train one of your kids to be the leader of a complete culture going forward, that for Aang, that is so important to him that, from his perspective, he was in ice when the Air Nomad genocide happened. He missed the death of all of his people and came back and he was the last airbender. And it really hit him hard when he found out about this, that to some extent he felt like maybe he could have done something if that happened. He could have done something if he was around at that time. So there's a certain amount of guilt about that. So when he and Katara got married and stuff like that, you definitely get the idea that there was a lot of pressure on them to have kids straight away, and then pressure to make sure that at least one of the kids that they have was an airbender. So I suppose the fact that the order that they have them in is like the first kid is a non-bender, then they get a waterbender, and then their last kid is finally an airbender. Like the kind of pressure is off, but there was such a high pressure time during the birth of their first two kids. And you can understand the relief and the focus of Aang to give to Tenzin. But it's also notable there, because obviously the story that we kind of from there get is that once Tenzin was born, he focused like almost completely on him. But it's important to note that like there was a time when Bumi was the only child of Katara and Aang, so he got a lot of attention then. When Kaya was born, of course, she would also get fairly equal attention as well when she was born. Tenzin, I think rightfully so, got a lot of one-on-one time with Aang because it made complete sense for that to be the case. Like, we do find out that the other two also got some sort of training in just air nomad culture because it's part of their family. But Tenzin, as an airbender, did need that time, absolutely. And to some extent, I do think, I think Kaya is the one who appears to be the most kind of somewhat resentful towards Aang and like not having a lot of time with him. You do get the sense that it is her remembering the bad moments rather than the good moments, that she probably remembers the 10-15 times that Aang left on a journey with Tenzin to go to one of the air temples to teach him something, and it perhaps forgets the 20-30 times they went on like a family outing together. Hence why, like, when the book 2 reunion of the three siblings happens, it happens over them looking at a photo of the family together, the photo that you can see basically throughout this entire video. That just knowing that there was a time when the family is together, that Aang didn't just focus exclusively on Tenzin, that there of course were times when he was there for the family and had moments with Kaya, had moments with Bumi, that there were troubles along the way, but in general they had a very happy family, that there wasn't really that much to complain about. Like, their father was a very important person, so was their mother. Of course, him having such a role where he has to care not just about his own family and the people he loves, but also a role that requires him to care about everyone in the world, the balance, the spirit world as well. Of course, to some extent, his role is going to come before them at certain points, but that doesn't make him a bad father, I don't think. It's just that as the children of such a famous person, that's kind of the burden that they have to bear. That they perhaps don't get that much time with their father, but their father allowed them, for the most part, to live in an era of peace and stuff like that. So, there's pluses and negatives, of course, to Aang as a parent, but I wouldn't be like too incredibly critical of him. Of course, definitely he probably did. We kind of get that he did favor Tenzin once he was born, but I think that the reasons for why that is the case make sense. Perhaps maybe he maybe forgot about the other two at certain points, and like perhaps they could have also went on the trips to teach Tenzin about the air temples and stuff like that. But in general, they both clearly took their own path. In that Bumi, we get the idea that he joined the United Forces, and became a commander in time, and a very respected one at that, to the point where General Iroh even respects him. So he found his role over time, and especially with Bumi, you get the idea that as much as he felt like maybe he didn't have as much time to himself with his father. His whole idea throughout life was to kind of continue on Aang's work. And I'll get into Kaya in a minute, and it's kind of the same with him, but that Bumi joined the United Forces kind of to be somewhat of a peacekeeper, to join this army that's the United Forces for the United Republic, the entire world. And he did that to get a position to where he could also help bring peace to the world in his own way as a non-bender. That he doesn't have the bending techniques to do that, of course, but being a good leader, being a good commander of an army, he can do that, and over time he does. And Kaya even tells him that, like, Dad would be proud of you because of what you've done and what you've accomplished. So there's that. And then, of course, over time, he eventually becomes an airbender through harmonic convergence, and must feel an even greater connection with his father because of that, even though he's learning the technique at such a later stage in his life. It's a really kind of emotional moment. I was thinking back on book 3, him getting airbending, and over time they more focus on him and Tenzin, of course, here, but you can tell he struggles with it initially and is kind of really kind of gets frustrated by it, but by the end of it, he, maybe is not master airbender tier, but is really becomes a very accomplished airbender in his own right. And I would have liked a little bit of more focus on Bumi, just to kind of show how much it means to him to be an airbender and have that connection to Aang in the same way that Tenzin has had, like, his whole life. On the Kaya side of things, we learn from Tenzin that he says that at some point she left the home to travel the world to kind of find herself. And we find out that on her journeys, what she did here was, obviously after being trained in waterbending and healing by Katara, she basically traveled the world as a healer, a kind of somewhat spiritualist, and stuff like that. And she basically just went on this kind of journey to find herself. Obviously, to some extent, I think this is frustration with her father and, like, him not focusing on her as much, perhaps. But there's also, we have the reveal that she is one of the characters who is confirmed to be LGBTQ in the Avatar universe. So, perhaps that was part of it as well, finding out her sexuality and stuff like that. But we don't have a lot of details on that. We don't know if Kaya ever had a family or anything, but that I think to some extent does come into play as well. But she did come back to comfort her mother when Aang died. So, there you get the sense that she was closer to Katara than the other two. So, for Tenzin, maybe perhaps he oftentimes didn't have as much time to focus with his mother because perhaps Kaya was having one-on-one waterbending lessons with her. So there's a lot of dynamics in the family that they don't specifically address because they go for a specific thing in book 2, but you kind of get the sense that to Katara, to make up for the fact that that Aang was focusing so much on Tenzin, perhaps gave even more lessons to Kaya, and that meant that, like, there was a little bit of favoritism throughout the family, but nothing too dramatic that, like, split the family apart, like Azula Ozai, Ursa Zuko type situation here. But it's a strong family dynamic for sure. And then obviously, like, over time, Tenzin, as far as we're aware, is the only one of the kids who has kids himself, and you can see that Kaya has a close bond to Jinora because of their spirituality, and eventually Bumi finds out that he's quite spiritual as well. And in fact, the other two siblings who aren't Bumi eventually becomes an airbender, but initially aren't airbenders, are actually much more spiritual than Tenzin, who is the natural airbender who should be spiritual. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics going on in the Kataang family, and just on the spirituality thing, like, again, like the Tenzin's kids, they all the kids like their aunt and uncle. You can tell that Milo and Bumi kind of get on because of their kind of crazy personalities and stuff like that. but in general, what book two was kind of about was them all coming together. Like, it was Tenzin learning from his own kids how to kind of solve the issues with his own siblings, and kind of through that solve their issues with their parents. And there's a couple more things I think to talk about here. In the sense of, like, you get the idea that they all over time had their own paths. Like, Tenzin's was decided for him straight away. So again, coming back to that point of like the whole celebrity family, that their parents saved the world. They had this kind of thing thrust upon them, that Aang as the Avatar had this to do. Katara found Aang, so it was kind of she felt responsibility to help him fulfill his destiny. But the kids, with a family and stuff like that, what are they meant to do? So Tenzin, of course, once he was born and he was an airbender, like his future was kind of decided for him. He just has to continue on the airbender kind of lineage. And then the other two, they struggled. You get the idea. I think Bumi, like, at some point reveals that he was kind of almost like forced or something like that, captured and put into service in the United Republic forces. And then Kaya really just didn't know what to do and just kind of traveled the world and kind of became somewhat of a healer, kind of spiritualist type character. So I think it really does have somewhat of a link to, like, sometimes you see those stories about kids of celebrities not really knowing what their kind of path is because their parent is just the thing that they're known for. But coming back to the overall topic here, were Katara, Aang, bad parents? No, like, they make a point to say that Aang wasn't the perfect parent, but I think there are a lot of reasons for why, especially Bumi and Kaya would kind of think the way they do, and I think it is somewhat over-exaggerated because they're it's the family reunion after so long apart. It's reflecting on so many years of the past and these little issues that they perhaps didn't deal with when they were younger, and it's just them remembering more so Aang and Tenzin being together rather than their own time with their father, when in fact they probably did have lots of great times individually with their father. They just kind of tend to remember that in general Aang gave Bumi a little bit more focus, but I think in the end they kind of accept that it ultimately was for good, in that Tenzin having his kids, the airbenders eventually coming back in book 3, is a result of the fact that Aang planned this out and devoted so much time to training Tenzin so that he could then be the one to fully bring the airbenders back into the world. So, I can see where people come from, in that I do in general like the idea that, like, our characters that we really love when they're older and have families of their own, they're not perfect, like their own parents are treated with having issues, that they are as well. But Aang and the general Kataang family, I don't think there's a whole lot of problems there. The only one I haven't really discussed is like Aang and Katara when they're older. We don't actually have a lot of information to go on here. Other than, I would say, the fact that they're sort of in the comics as they're gradually approaching, the issue of, when are they going to get married. There's always been hints in the comics already, even though they're still quite young, that's going to happen sooner rather than later. There's been like little hints about just the fact that, okay, they're really close now. When's it going to happen? And then just recently in Smoke and Shadow Part 2, there's been the really emotional kind of moment where Aang has to go to help Zuko, whereas the two of them have to go back to their home in the Southern Water Tribe. And it's the first time that they're apart for a while. So to me, it's the first thing for Katara and Aang of, like, how does their relationship, like, last when Aang will often be taken away from Katara on Avatar duties. And I assume they're perhaps going to address that in Part 3 or the next comic series, that it's probably the one kind of potential issue that they had in their relationship that they actually had to deal with, but that, again, I don't think overall it would be much of a problem. I think Katara, of all people, would absolutely understand, having traveled with Aang for so long and helped him to be the Avatar, that the world to some extent has to come first, ahead of her, sometimes ahead of the kids and the family, that his job is so important, like it goes beyond just that one family, in the sense of like he's such a powerful person in terms of being a bridge between the physical world and the spirit world, that has to have priority at some point. So I think definitely Katara would be very understanding of Aang's work and the pressure that he's under, given that, you know, she was part of Team Avatar. She was kind of had some of the responsibility, I suppose, of the Avatar during the war and initially afterwards, kind of being, you know, Aang's girlfriend and advising him on certain things at times. So she definitely would understand it, absolutely. And, you know, just I suppose the fact that when Aang dies, that she then very much devotes herself to training Katara, training Korra. I mean, Katara devotes herself to training Korra. You get the sense that the Avatar in general was important to her, not just because of Aang, but that she sees the Avatar as this very important thing in the world, that her to, you know, train the next one is important as well, and not just train her in waterbending, but also train her in terms of more of the kind of philosophy side of being the Avatar, that her teaching Korra about like the amount of loss that Aang experienced in his life and how that stacks up against the kind of physical pain and injuries that Korra suffered. And there's really interesting things here. There's obviously a lot of ground still to be covered, and definitely as a big Kataang fan and shipper, I would very much hope that we get like their wedding covered, you know, what their reaction was to becoming parents for the first time, you know, their first kid, kind of hoping it's an airbender but then finding out it's a non-bender. You know, there's probably some tough times in their relationship, but they're, again, such a strong couple. They're so close that I think they could basically get through anything without really much issue at all, many arguments in their relationship, because they're not that type of couple like a Mei Zuko, who really care about each other but kind of tend to argue a lot. So, you know, there's that. In general, I think I've covered most of the kind of relationships within this family. As I said, it's a complex family dynamic, because it's effectively, you know, the most celebrity couple in the entire world. Like, as I said, Aang as an Avatar is far and away the most famous Avatar. Maybe Korra stacks up against him, but even then, like, Aang bringing balance to the world at such a young age, in ending the war and helping to form the United Republic, they're big things that would make him known across the entire world. And just the journey he went on to end the world. He's been so many places. He absolutely would be known. And then, especially once the full details of his story would have come out to the world, about the fact that he was frozen in ice for 100 years, he's a kind of man at a time, and the story about how his team formed and stuff like that. Like, he would be absolutely one of the most interesting and famous people in the world, not to mention the role that he has. So the kids, the wife of this such an important character, of course there's going to be some issues in that it absolutely wouldn't be the most normal family dynamic, in that we don't know, I suppose, fully exactly like where they lived. Like, we know that Tenzin and his family lives in Air Temple Island, but did Aang live there? I don't really know if that's the case. Like, I assume to some extent, you know, Aang would see the Southern Water Tribe as a home as well, because it's where his journey started, it's where Katara is from. But I assume, having been one of the persons who helped to found the United Republic, he would probably see that as like a home, in terms of a place he helped create, and just a central place for him to act as the Avatar and be relatively close to almost anywhere in the world from that central location. So maybe there was an issue in the relationship when Aang kind of said to Katara, we kind of have to move to United Republic and live there. But we don't know exactly. There's a lot of ground still to be covered, as I said, but what we do know so far definitely hints and presents some issues throughout the relationships, but none to the degree where I think you could actively like very much say Aang was a bad parent or the siblings had like major issues with each other. I think in this whole family dynamic, all of the issues are just kind of little things that, because they are family, are sometimes amplified, and especially if they're not dealt with immediately, as is the case with a lot of this between the siblings. There's been so many years that have passed since it happened. They definitely get amplified over time, and I think that's just the case here. Given all the resolutions that happen, it's clear that there are no huge issues between any of them. The siblings don't hate each other. Kaya, even though she was probably the most negative one towards Aang, ultimately I don't think feels particularly like that she had a bad childhood. Just that she perhaps would have wished she had got more alone time with her father, which she didn't quite get, and that's completely fine. And I assume Aang would have felt that one of his failings as a father would be that, as much as it needed to happen, he did focus on Tenzin more than the others. So I'm going to end it there before I start completely repeating myself. But that has been this week's discussion topic. If you have another topic that you want me to cover, definitely in the comments let me know what it is, and I'll see if I can do it one of the upcoming weeks in this video. But other than that, thanks for watching, and bye.